So, our approach to planning is crucial to being agile. How we do planning is essential to delivering value. However, the wrong approach can set us up for failure from the start. And our natural tendency is actually to use the wrong approach. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about what can we learn from Oscar-winning movies and how they approach planning. What can we learn from blockbuster games, like best games of all time? And what can we learn from my personal screw-ups, which are many. So, Pixar. They seem like an Oscar-winning hit machine, right? Oscar after Oscar, blockbuster after blockbuster. Nintendo, Zelda, Mario, they produce hit after hit, and Valve, Half-Life, Counter-Strike. All mega successes. What can we learn from these undisputed masters? What do they do better than others? So, let's start by talking about Pixar. So, you can see here, there are 27 Pixar movies. How many Oscars do you think Pixar won with all these movies? So, one finger is 4 Oscars. So please raise your fingers. 1 finger for every 4 Oscars. How many Oscars do you think Pixar won? So I see some 8s. I see some, 40. So Pixar won 23 Oscars. And I cheated a little bit because this includes their short movies, right? But you might be thinking there's a recipe for success. Because actually there are all these LinkedIn posts where they talk about Pixar storytelling. This is the recipe you have to follow to make movies like Pixar. But that actually is all a lie. There is no recipe for success. All Pixar movies suck in the beginning. All of them. This Ed Catmull, like CEO of Pixar, he actually said that. And he wrote in his book, he showed all the different movies that they've made, and yeah, all of them sucked. So I'm gonna show you some examples. Toy Story, which was their first movie, it initially was really, really bad. So actually they made the storyboard, right? And it was finished. They showed it to executives and to Disney, and they said, this sucks. Woody is really mean. We need to change everything. You have to rewrite the script. Production was halted. And then when the movie was released, it was a massive success, right? Another example, Up. So who here has seen Up, the movie? Yeah, many people. So the first version of the movie was actually about a king in a floating castle in the sky who had 2 sons who hated each other. Does that look anything like the final movie? No. So they were unable to make the story work, and they realized this during making the movie. So they actually adjusted the story, and that's what they do really well. They have a really good process for figuring out what works and what doesn't work. Now, I'm going to turn to the world of gaming, which is maybe a little bit closer to software development. So, as a kid, I remember actually, I was going to gym class and they were talking about GoldenEye 64. So there was someone in class explaining to me, you can play with 4 people on your TV against each other. My mind was blown. And here's the best thing. It was added without management knowing. So the game was 6 months delayed, and in the final month, there was a developer playing around, and the developer loved it so much, they just added it to the game. And then when management saw it, they were like, this is amazing. But if they would have known before, they would, if he would have asked for permission, they would have probably not allowed it. Another example, Half-Life. Half-Life is one of the best games of all times. It's actually the reason my grades in high school were very low. That was how addicted I was. So this game was not delayed once, not twice, but an astounding 3 times. And why did they delay? Because they really were doing a lot of testing, play testing, and they realized it's not good enough. We can make it a lot better. And actually, Valve, for those who don't know them, they produced many blockbuster games, like many amazing AAA games. And they actually make fun of it. They call it Valve time. All of their games are delayed. It's done when it's done. And you might be thinking, yeah, right, this is just Valve, right? Or GoldenEye. These are just some examples. But actually there's this book, Blood, Sweat and Pixels, which talks about many great games, like The Witcher, which is also a Netflix series. Every game is delayed at least once. And if you read that book, every game is delayed. And now, from my personal experience, right? Because you might be thinking, yeah, games, right? Building software products is really different. So for some reason, I'm cursed. I'm involved in the rebuild of software products. I've been involved in 7 rebuilds. How many do you think were delivered on time? Please raise your hands, like maximum of 7. What do you think? 0. I've gotten close though. One was really close, like a few months, so I'm very proud of that. What I also want to stress, right? You might be thinking, yeah, I'm the one that sucks. No. Like 2 of them, I was involved in the planning, like I was really in the lead. 5 of them I wasn't, so it wasn't me. So what can we learn from this, right? So we can learn, I think, 3 things. Our initial plans often suck. And even when everything goes according to plan, the result might still suck. Toy Story, right? The storyboards were done, was delivered on time, still sucked. And unless you have a good way of telling that, like how good you're doing, the result will suck. And Pixar is really good at that. They are really good at saying, hey, is this movie going to be good? Is it going to resonate with people? Yes or no? And this is actually what I see happening in a lot of companies. Actually, the opposite. I call this the planning cycle of madness. So basically, in companies, what happens is we don't meet our roadmaps and timelines. And then management gets angry. Our plans suck. We need to do a better job at planning. And everybody gets into the meeting rooms. Big room planning, many days. We need to do better. And then we inject our plans with noise and speculation and assumptions. And then actually our plans become an anchor. They drag us down. They prevent collaboration. They prevent innovation. And then we are locked in these plans. And then we miss the timelines again. And I've seen this happening many, many times, especially bigger companies. If you want to break this cycle, if you want to break this planning cycle of madness, you need to understand the concept of friction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about military history. I want to stress, I'm not going to glorify warfare in any way, but they faced this problem hundreds of years ago. So basically, friction is what makes simple things difficult. It's basically the difference between war in reality and war on paper. It's basically the difference between theory and practice. In very concrete terms, because this sounds very abstract, it's, let's say there's a little bit of fog, so you don't see the enemy, and then you cannot hit them with your cannon. Or it's a little bit rainy, and the cavalry arrives a little bit later. Or maybe they don't even arrive at all, and then that means all your plans are going to fail. And there are all these little effects that you cannot predict up front, like the weather, that can have a big impact on the course of battle. And that's why your plans need to change. So basically, the more friction you have, the more surprises. And the more surprises, the more your plans need to change. So if what you're doing is clear, there's no friction. And if there's no friction, it means it's obvious for anyone. Like everybody in the room, it's obvious. So let me give you an example. If you look at these stairs, and I would ask you, hey, walk the stairs. You see the start of the stairs. You see all the steps. You see the top. It's perfectly clear what needs to happen. So just follow the steps, and life is going to be great. There's no fog up beforehand, which means you have all the information before starting. There's no fog of speculation. I mean, you see all the steps. Like you can make a perfect plan. And then if you follow the plan, you're going to end up at the top of the stairs. But then friction increases, right? Complicated. So complicated means you need expertise. There are going to be few surprises for experts. So my sister recently bought an espresso machine. And she asked me a lot of questions because making espresso isn't that easy. Like if you need to be an expert, you really need to understand like how does this work, how much coffee, how much pressure. So if you're an expert, it's easy. There are steps that you need to follow. You maybe screw up a few of your first espressos, but then you can make a perfect espresso. So basically the main difference is there are steps, but experts know the steps that you have to follow. And the key thing here is, there will be some surprises, but if you don't have expertise, you're going to have many surprises because it isn't going to make sense. So my sister called me up and she said, I made 10 espressos, all of them suck. And then I said, yeah, you need to do some theory. So I sent her some videos, and now it's going much better. So without expertise, you're going to have the fog beforehand. Like you're just going to be surrounded by fog. You don't have enough information before starting. If you plan too much, you're going to inject the fog of speculation, and then your plans and actions are not going to produce the desired results. So the key thing here is, you need an expert, and then life is going to be great. If what you're doing is complex, then you're experiencing very strong friction. A very good example is the movie Jaws by Steven Spielberg. So Steven Spielberg, when he made the movie Jaws, he was very young, but he was already a super experienced filmmaker. He made many series, many movies. So in that movie, actually, he initially started with the idea there's going to be a mechanical shark, and we're going to film it at sea. And those were his biggest mistakes. Because the shark kept breaking down at sea, first problem. So the shark didn't work. The second problem was filming at sea with the light is very difficult because you make a shot and then a few minutes later the light looks different. You cannot splice it together. It looks like shit. So he went triple over budget basically, just filming the movie. And what was interesting is because he didn't have the shark, he actually decided, okay, I'm going to make the movie about the presence of the shark. You're not going to see the shark. And he actually rewrote the script every night. Like he would rewrite the script and give it to actors on the day of filming. And this is the reason why that movie became such a big success, because you don't see the shark until like 1.5 hours into the movie. And then what you see is mostly your imagination. And another cool story, John Williams, who composed the music for Jaws, he actually played the music for Jaws. So who knows the Jaws theme? It's like 2 notes, like duh-duh, duh-duh. So John Williams played that for Steven Spielberg. And Steven Spielberg was like laughing, like, are you joking with me? 2 notes? No, this is it. So the key thing here is, if you have expertise like Spielberg, still before starting, there are going to be surprises. There's the fog of beforehand, the fog of speculation, and your plans and actions might not produce the desired results. So here I'm going to summarize it a bit. So as friction increases, there's going to be more surprises, and there's going to be lower predictability and ability to make strong plans. So the key thing is, if what you're doing is clear and complicated, that means you can have plan-driven approaches. The key difference between clear and complicated is you need experts, but you can have a plan, and if you have a plan, life will be great. If you're on the right-hand side, plans are not good enough. You need to have goal-driven approaches. You need to start with the goal, because you need to change your plans. And the plan guides the creation of the plans. The goal guides the creation of the plans. So basically, left-hand side, in the plan we trust, and in the right-hand side, in the results we trust. Yeah. So when what you're doing is complex, there's far more you don't know than what you do know. You're going to have many surprises. And then, if you make too much plans, you spend too much time planning, you get overconfident planning, and you eject noise. So you actually make your life worse. Your plans are going to suck more. And it's very easy to take the wrong approach. So as you, like some of you may know, I've written a book, right? And then before I wrote the book, I already knew these concepts. And what I actually did is I spent a weekend like writing, and I finished 20% of the book. And then I thought, I've been writing for around 5 years, 1 article per week. I think I can deliver it in 6 months, basically. That's what I thought. And the publisher asks you for these timelines. So they ask you, like, when are you going to finish the 2 draft chapters? When are you going to finish the full manuscript? And when are you going to submit the final thing? Right? So I was very confident, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. How many of these 3 timelines do you think I hit? 0? 1? Yeah, so I cheated because I hit 1 timeline. Let me go to the next. I hit the first timeline. You want to know why? I already had finished it before I signed the contract. And every other timeline, I didn't hit. And why was that? Because I was doing overconfident planning. And even though I knew everything, what I was just telling you before, it's just our natural tendency. We assume that writing a book is similar to writing some articles, but it absolutely isn't. And also what makes it even worse is when you sign this contract, if you're late, there's actually a clause in there where they say, hey, we can hire a ghostwriter to complete your book. And we're going to pay him or her out of your, or them out of your royalties. So I was really nervous. If you visualize it another way, what you're doing is complicated, and you spend little time preparing, your plans are going to suck. And then, if you spend a lot of time preparing with the right expertise, your plans are going to rock, they're going to be amazing. But if what you're doing is complex, then your plans are going to suck if you don't spend a lot of time preparing. But if you spend too much time preparing, your plans are going to suck even more. And this is why it's so important. And our natural tendency, just like me with the book, is to treat stuff as complicated. And management and leadership does the same thing. I believe it has to do with our schooling system, right? You get the book, you read everything in the book, and you can get 100%. And if what you're doing is complex, it ain't like that. Like, you can read the book, and you're still going to make a ton of mistakes. So what should we be doing instead? And I call this humble planning. So instead, we should actually make very simple plans, very humble plans, where we actually encounter reality, where every step we take shapes the way, and where we plan more later when we know more, not before starting when we know the least. So how should we fix this? Two things. You need to start with humble plans. Every step we take helps shape the way. Plan more later when you know more. And the other thing is, we have to lead with the context. What are we trying to achieve? And why does it matter? So what is the outcome we're looking for, and what is the relevant context? And the second part is often forgotten. Even if they talk about outcomes, there is a relevant context. So getting back to Pixar. So how does Pixar do this, right? So of course, they have this amazing process where they have all these storytelling principles. But the key thing they do is they have a brain trust. So the brain trust is like this committee of all these experts in various fields of animation. They come together every few months and they take a look at every movie Pixar is making. And then they give feedback to the director where they say, hey, this part maybe doesn't work so well. Maybe you should think about this. And the director doesn't have to do anything with the feedback. But very often they do, of course. But this is the key thing. They're anchored in the results. Yes, they have a plan. And yes, they try to hit timelines. But they really look, is this going to be a great movie? And how do we know that? Is it going to make people feel something? In gaming. So why Valve was able to delay Half-Life 3 times? Because they did playtesting. So in games, they do have people play the games and they give feedback. And the people that were playing the games were saying them, the game sucks. It's not fun. It's not engaging. And of course, they were also telling why. And then they got feedback on how to improve the game. And they used that. And that's why they were confident to delay the game. And now I'm going to talk about my personal book story, right? So writing a book is tough. But one of the things I did right, planning I absolutely didn't do right. We've established that. But I had a really good brain trust, so to speak. I picked a group of reviewers with various characteristics. And the main thing is, I looked for, there are different kinds of people. And life isn't so black and white. But some people are more like grumpy cats. I'm a grumpy cat, by the way. I always look at stuff and I see the stuff that can be done better. So I divided my book reviewers in dolphins, like people that are super excited, they see the good parts, because you need those dolphins, because they will tell you what makes your book great. But you also need the grumpy cats, like the people that actually say, hey, this is the stuff that's not good. Maybe you're wrong here. And what I also did is I divided the book in experts and novices, because I wanted to appeal to both audiences. And as well, the dolphins help me to keep going, because they're exciting, and I get excited, and writing a book is incredibly draining, and you lose a lot of energy during the process. So, what's very important to keep in mind, we talk about friction. It's really important to understand friction, because if you understand that well, you don't need the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto is a summary of different Agile frameworks at the time, but friction is what's at the root of it. And if you want to understand Agile from first principles, you should understand friction. So, individuals and interactions over process and tools, it's about making the right decision in the moment when there's a surprise. Working software over comprehensive documentation, it's being focused on the result, not writing documentation, right? It's not the end result. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. That's basically about collaborating in the moment and doing the right thing instead of pointing to the contract where you say, yeah, we initially agreed upon this. So this is why we should do it. And responding to change over following a plan, well, that one is obvious. We're talking about that, this whole talk. So, in your Scrum teams, or in your Agile teams, what you're doing should feel like jazz. Like jazz is actually it's a paradox, because it's actually very structured, very disciplined. There are many rules, but there's a lot of improvisation and acting in the moment and reacting to what's happening. That's how doing Scrum or doing Agile should feel like. And if you're preparing everything up front, it's not going to work. Jazz bands don't do that. They don't meet before playing jazz to say, hey, this is what we're going to play. No. So improvisation in jazz is like walking a tightrope in the wind. You navigate the uncertainty with skill, responding to the changing conditions, finding equilibrium in the unexpected, and creating a breathtaking performance that defies gravity. This is from Gary Burton, a jazz player. So yes, you do need to look ahead. You're walking the tightrope, but you cannot predict the wind and what's going to happen. So you need to adjust to what's happening in the moment. And that's why it's really important. You should move your Scrum to the background ASAP. If I read Slack channels, I get really worried, because a lot of people ask questions like, how do you do this from the world of Scrum, or according to Scrum, or according to Agile? Like, who should the Scrum Master report to? How do you handle dependencies in Scrum, right? How do we do estimation in Scrum? So the important thing we have to keep in mind, Scrum is purposefully incomplete. At best, it can be incomplete. It's not going to solve your problems. It's only going to show your problems. So stop sweating the Scrum. Focus on the results. How do we know what we're doing is really good? How do we know we're creating value for our customers? How do we know we can capture that as business value? These are the questions we should be talking about. And if we get sucked into the sprint or too much in the process, then we kill those conversations. It's kind of like the jazz band that talks about the rules of jazz, right? They're not going to be making music. So, if you remember one thing from this talk, the more we try to prevent sucking at predicting, the more we will guarantee to suck at adapting. We should lead with intent and humble planning, because then the plans can be created as you discover what's necessary while you do the work. So the key thing here is unsuck your plans as you do the work and discover what's necessary. Thank you. Any questions? Don't be shy.
What character did you play on GoldenEye?
Oddjob.
Oh, you're not allowed to do that.
So Oddjob was this really tiny character, and he was actually impossible to kill. And yeah.
It was basically cheating.
Yes.
Maarten was a cheater.
I was a cheater. But I loved Oddjob because Goldfinger, right? I think. Yeah, he was a great character.
Hi, nice to meet you. Oh, my question is a bit longer, I think.
That's okay.
I think we all are in a situation where business wants predictability because it's money, it's investments, and all this cool stuff that brings bonuses in the end. But, of course, we can't commit to the predictability because of all you said. It is completely true. So, any advice on the balance, how to reach that humble planning scale?
Yeah. So I think the key thing is you have to explain to the business that predictability and delivering on time is incredibly difficult and why it is difficult. And like a good way of talking about it is using simple examples. For example, let's say I would drop you on an island that you don't know. And you have to find your way back to, I don't know, the mayor's house. And then I would ask you, okay, I want you to know how long it's going to take, tell me how long it's going to take, and all the steps you're going to take to get there. It's impossible, right? It's an insane question. And I think that's what really important. We need to explain to leadership, like, what you're asking of me is insane. Like, I understand, right, that they want to have an idea of how much money it's going to cost, and you can do guesses, but let's not try to create plans that with a false sense of certainty to produce a number which is blatantly inaccurate. I mean, if they want numbers, they're going to get numbers, and they're going to be inaccurate, just as inaccurate with the planning as without. So.
Oh, thank you. So basically start with the goals, achieve results, and verify in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, get them in understanding, like, why is it so difficult? And because, how do you say, the alternative is what I often see, the planning cycle of madness.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, I'm here.
Hey.
So the same question, but moving to the next level. How about public sector when you have all the legislation and restrictions and they still want predictability? So how you deal with such planning?
Yeah. So as I said before, right, I've been involved in many startups and scale-ups rebuilding products. And every single time the CEO says, I need a timeline. I need to know when what's going to be done. And the key thing I did is not go into a room with everyone, but just with a few people, do some napkin calculation, make some guesses, and you provide some milestones. But the key thing which I didn't do is I didn't put the whole team in a meeting room, let them make all of these assumptions, and then based on a plan, which is disconnected from reality, give an estimate. Because then when you start working, you're screwed. Like you have all this plan with all these wrong assumptions, all these decisions already made, at a point in time when you have the least information. So yeah, if they want guesses, guess. But the main advice would be, do humble planning. Don't get sucked in to this false sense of certainty. Don't do what I did with my book, you know? Basically.
Thank you, Maarten. In agility, we talk a lot about co-creation and the power of that, whether that's in teams or so forth. So thinking around the different domains you've talked about and thinking about the need to really get the business colleagues, as was mentioned over here on side, how visible might you make an artifact like that with the quadrants to co-create a shared understanding of, you know, what is validly classed as complexity and what isn't? So, for example, cone of uncertainty, that's one artifact you might hang a conversation around, but what might the key success factor be in using what you've set out there to negotiate and co-create that understanding of complexity?
Yeah, so I think you're touching on a very important point. You need to collaborate, you need to co-create, right? Because if you involve them in making the plans and the trade-offs and make them understand why we're doing things in a certain way, then you have buy-in, they will get it, instead of like, here's how we're doing it, and they've got to live with it. So one of the key things I do is, you saw those little cards, right? Like with clear, complicated. I do a game with that, and I just try to, and I also ask a question, for example, okay, so what you're doing is complicated, but you lack knowledge. What's going to happen? And make them really understand it. And also ask questions like, okay, so we have all these roadmaps. How many times did we deliver on time? Yeah, never, right? So get them involved with these games, or to understand really what's behind it.
Okay, thank you.
Your biggest fan was willing to ask.
Oh.
Microphone here.
When is the next book? I don't know. Like, no, I'm serious. Like, something is going to grab me at some point in time, and I will feel compelled to write a book. And until then, I just read a lot of books. And yeah, cannot give any answer there.
Hello, I also have a question. Here.
Yes, I need to see
Here.
where.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good. Sorry.
And how to make your goals success?
Yeah. So, what's really important is when you create goals, they need to include intent. Like, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? Why does it matter? And why is that? It's because it's actually a very, how do you say, commonly used concept in the army. It's called commander's intent. So every plan, every mission is accompanied with an objective. And the key thing there is that if the people understand what we're trying to achieve and why it matters, then they can create the plans and adjust them as necessary. Of course, this still sounds a bit abstract, right? So I've created the FOCUS acronym for sprint goals. So that's something you can use to check your sprint goals. So FOCUS, the first one is fun. Like, come up with a fun title, at least memorable. Outcome-oriented, so what are we trying to achieve? What kind of result? C for collaborative, make it together, right? Because if you make it together, then everybody will have the same understanding and you will get the best result because they're able to contribute. The U for ultimate, like why, what is the context that matters? And S for singular, one thing, not two or three things. That can help. So check your sprint goals with that, and otherwise you just send me a message and I can help out.
Hey, so what about discovery? Can't we mitigate a bit those plans if we do discovery upfront?
Yes. So discovery, right? Maybe let's start with the definition of discovery, because maybe people have a different. So how I see discovery, and you can tell me if you agree with that. I feel discovery is about like doing small experiments that are cheap to discover like, hey, what is really going on? Like, what are the risks? What don't we know? Like these kind of things. So you should always be doing that. And I think one of the main challenges I see is a lot of people think that everything has to happen in one sprint. So you need to do discovery, you need to do delivery, and then you need to do validation. It's not possible. Like if you ask any product manager, results are lagging. They can take many weeks. So ideally, right, during the sprint review, the ideal world, it's already live, right? It's already in production, you're already gathering data. So you can already talk about the data. But I think the key thing here is you need to do discovery every sprint, because building something is incredibly expensive and incredibly slow. Well, for example, talking to a customer, I mean, when you've planned the interview, can be incredibly cheap, fast way to gather information. So as you gain more confidence, then you do more expensive things like writing code, which is super slow. So hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Maarten.
Hey, Eric. Good to see you.
So I was thinking about a suitable question, and I thought of one. Where do you think this tendency, this natural tendency to want to plan comes from?
Yeah, I think we like to be in control. I think, I mean, for example, me, I was so incredibly stressed today. So you're going to go through the slides over and over again, and you love like thinking about every, like, they're going to ask this question, or this is going to resonate. Like, and I think it's just a natural tendency. And as well, our schooling system is really focused on complicated stuff. Like, you do physics, right? You get a physics book, you study it, you can get a 10. But if what you're doing is complex, then, yeah, it's not going to work that way. And I think that's the main thing. We're just really trained and hardwired for all this predictable and plannable stuff. And complex stuff is just not as natural to us. And I don't know if it's something we can overcome with our school, like if we change our schooling system, but I think it has its roots in that. So, thank you.
So what would you recommend when you do your initial plan and people take it for granted? Like, you gave us one estimation. Why are you not keeping your word? You said that you're going to do it on Friday, but now you say next week. What do you do?
Yeah. So I think it's really important that you explain to stakeholders all these, how do you say, expectations are forecasts. They're based on the current information. And the easiest way to talk about it is the weather. Like 1 year from now, if you plan a wedding, you can look at the weather forecast, but it might still rain, so you're going to have a plan B. And actually, the weather forecast only starts becoming accurate, I think, like 1 week before, then it increases in accuracy. I think it's the same thing. Like, the closer we get to finishing, the more accurate our forecasts will be, and also the more useless they're going to be, because you're all close to finishing. And I think that's what you should be talking about. And yeah, it can be incredibly frustrating. I understand that. But yeah, how do you say? The reality is, I've been there, like even close to finishing, you can discover something, a surprise that changes everything. And then you need to engage in dialogue. And they will probably ask, why didn't you know this before? Well, because we couldn't. It's kind of like the doctor that opens up a patient, right? You did all the pictures, but then you see what's really inside, and they're like, oh shit, this is not going to take 3 hours, this operation. It's going to be 7 hours. Yeah.
And do you think it's worth even saying your estimates if you're less than 50% confident that you're going to reach them?
So the main thing I try to do is I don't think management has to know our estimates. I tell them the forecasts. Like if they're interested in timelines, give them the timelines. But don't give them the naked estimates, because the reality is you're going to discover stuff, you're going to miss stuff, people are going to make mistakes. So let's say you estimate 100 story points, you do 50 story points per sprint, then you can tell them, hey, it's going to take 3 sprints or 4 sprints with a timeline, something like that, but never give them the naked. It's not, they don't need to know, right? Like, yes.
Hi, Maarten.
Yes.
So I have a question about the external investors. Like, let's assume that company has some idea of the product and is looking for the external investors. So how to encourage investors to invest some money if they do not know when the product will be delivered? I mean, if the company is not able to predict when the product will be delivered, because I assume that investors expect some return of investment of the money.
Yeah. So here's the reality. If you're going to be talking to investors, and I would strongly encourage you to meet them where they are. Probably in the meeting, you're not going to be able to convince them. So you need to make some stuff up like that, but that's what you do anyway.
Thanks.
Hi, I have one question from practice. Sometimes people are using Agile as an excuse not meeting the deadlines or agreed timelines. So how to keep this motivation in the Agile team to do their best as they can, but not to plan like, okay, I will not be fully here, not put all my energy to the task, because I can move the deadline because I'm Agile. So how to address that?
So that's a really great question. I think the key thing here is we talked about like every step you take helps shape the way. So focus on the steps, like break down in an important milestone where you, like, how do you say, let's say you're rebuilding a product. It's a huge thing, but you can make some of the steps, you can write them out. And then you can say, hey, like we're going to have a forecast based on what we currently know, but focus on the progress. Like, it's so easy. So I've actually been there. Like I worked at a company and there was a forecast for rebuilding the whole product. And then the discussion immediately became, how can we make the forecast shorter? No, like that's not what you should do. The forecast is the forecast. It's going to be wrong. So it's really about thinking like, hey, how can we, what's the first step that's going to set us up for success? Like how do we make the most progress? How can we make that as simple as possible? Instead of talking about how can we produce the estimates or the scope, like what, I think it's a different way of looking at it. Focus on like what you can see and the best next step to take and provide a forecast. And then you can also have some milestones that are later based on your current information, but just keep them a bit fuzzy. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
There's a question on the other side, I see.
Hey, Maarten.
Hey.
I didn't have enough time yesterday to ask a question about your book.
Oh.
So you said like you didn't hit deadlines and had much work to do there. So how many times did you rewrite the book?
Yeah.
And did you adjust the goal a bit while rewriting it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here's my goal when I was writing the book. It's actually pretty interesting. So I was already telling people I was going to write a book about sprint goals. And the first thing that people said was like, huh? You're writing a book on sprint goals? How can you write a whole book on sprint goals? That was literally what people were saying. So my goal was that when people would read my book, they would think, duh, why didn't anybody write this book sooner? That was my very clear goal. So, and that's also why I picked both experts and novices, right? Because I wanted the experts to have a different perspective on something they already knew. So I think that's the main thing. So regarding rewriting, how do you say? Every chapter I got feedback, and sometimes I removed stuff. But I have to be honest, like what is one of my biggest weaknesses is that I don't produce a lot of volume. But the big advantage is, for some reason, I don't remove a lot of stuff either. So there were some chapters where I actually removed a lot of stuff, but very often it was more like tweaking stuff. Yeah, and it's also because I was writing a lot on these topics, so I already had gotten a lot of feedback. So I don't know, like I don't think I rewrote huge things. It was more like that I added stuff or removed things.
All right, fair enough. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, just a follow-up question on the example of your book.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that you hit only one deadline over the three ones. What were the key factors behind that? And by how much did you miss these deadlines? And more importantly, what I wanted to hear is in this context, when you basically have to give deadlines to your editor, otherwise you might end up losing money, as you mentioned, because of the royalties and stuff. Yeah, how would you approach this deadline planning now that you have been through this thing?
Yeah, very good question. I think the main thing is when you're writing, so what I'm unsure about, because I've written one book, is writing a book complex because I just lack experience, or is it actually complicated? I don't know. Maybe if I've written 5 books, or maybe I could ask Stephen King, because he writes so many books, but I'm not unsure about that. But the main realization for me, which made the big difference, is I'm a complex system, right? So I have many flaws, and for me, writing a book is incredibly daunting. Like I get incredibly stressed, and I just kind of get paralyzed. I zone out, and that was my biggest hurdle. So the main thing I did was write 15 minutes per day, because then I would get into a habit. And if after 15 minutes I was not feeling it, I would stop. But very often I would continue writing 3 or 4 hours. And that made a big difference for me. Well, if I really focused on, I have to write 3 hours every day, and it was just too paralyzing. So why was it paralyzing? It was because actually, how do you say, I became dad to a second kid, so not a lot of sleep. Luckily, my wife helped a lot. So she did a lot of the kid at night, but still I didn't get the best sleep. Changing houses, changing jobs, getting promoted, yeah. So all this stuff that I didn't know up front, but as time dragged on, the time increased. So yeah. So what would I have done differently? I think I now understand myself better. During writing, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is why I hate university. Like, so this is why I suck at like studying many weeks before. So yeah, hope it answers a little bit. It's kind of facing your inner demons. That's what it was for me. So we've got, I think time's up.
Last question, I guess.
Last question? Yeah, sorry.
Maarten, thank you for the presentation. So I really want to touch upon the topic which I personally find very important. You brought that up in a presentation, like the complexity versus dealing with the ambiguity. And I think we, as human beings, we kind of require a little bit of training with this muscle.
Yeah.
So you refer to like playing video games and jazz, and I just wonder, any practices you have personally, maybe anything you bring to teams, that actually help us to train this muscle.
Yeah.
So for example, improv theater, I find it, McKinsey meets art. So I don't know, maybe anything you can advise us.
So what I try to do is get the team just to start with a sprint goal. And it doesn't have to be that the sprint backlog items are finished. So for example, I once started with a team, there was just a sprint goal, one sprint backlog item, which was a proof of concept. And then we just said, okay, we're going to do this proof of concept, and then we're going to create everything afterwards. Well, what's the worst that can happen? At the end of the sprint, you discover there are all of these obstacles that you cannot resolve within a sprint. Still a massive win, in my opinion. And the best case, you know you can achieve it. And you might not make as much progress as you can, but you might how do you say, not be as predictable as you want, but you can make as much progress as you can within a sprint. And I think this works really well. And I once worked with a team actually that they were actually telling me, no, we need 4 weeks, we need to do the spikes and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no. And then within 2 weeks, we delivered it. In the other case, we would have delivered it 4 weeks later, for sure. So this is something I would really recommend. Just start with a sprint goal and tell them, hey, and of course, I was a product owner, so life is a little bit easier. I tell them like, hey, if we don't meet the goal, I'm going to take the blame, no problem. But create psychological safety is also important. So thank you. One more thing I want to say, and then I'm going to stop. You can win my book. There are 2 copies. You need to be top of the leaderboard, number 1 and number 2. The only person that's not eligible is Chris Stone, who's sitting here, because he already is going to get a book. So, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Maarten, so much. I think we broke the record for the Q&A session since I don't know how many years.